Welcome to the Election University podcast, a weekly show where we hear from industry experts who share tips and tricks for winning campaigns. Whether you're running for office now, thinking about it for the future, or just want to know more about campaigns and elections, Election University is for you. With Election University, click, learn, win. And now your hosts, Jason Bennett and Rainey Cohen.
Hello.
Hi, we're back.
We're back.
We're back in studio. It's nice to see you, Jason.
It's nice to see you again, Rainey. I am so glad to be back in the studio.
Where we each have our own microphone and we don't have to share it with each other.
I know, and the noise and the sound quality is better.
People looking at us funny and they're like, why are you recording over there?
I know we did get a couple of
some side eye. Yeah.
Some side eye.
Yeah, it's fine. It's okay, Nashville. We don't hate you.
Nashville was a great experience. We'd love to hear from our listeners about what you thought about the podcast on the road. It certainly was easier for us to schedule folks back to back, so that was really nice. China Dickerson, Jordan Lieberman, and Chris Haler, thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to interview with us. But we'd love to hear from our listeners about what you thought on that as well. So welcome back.
Hooray.
Back in studio.
We're here. What do we got today?
Today we're doing something new, which is going to be very interesting to us. We're talking about some folks who have done some community organizing in Rhode Island. So we're heading out to the East Coast, West Coast. But we're going to the other coast, those coastal elites over in Rhode Island, to talk to them about the work that they've been doing organizing around women's rights. It's a feminist nonprofit organization called the Women Project in Rhode Island. And we're going to talk today to two of the founders of this organization about what they're doing to pass protections in the Rhode Island legislature for women's rights.
Right. So we are going to talk to Jocelyn Foy and Jordan Hevener. They are two of the 5 co-founders of this organization. Jocelyn seems to be like the artist of these two. She says in her profile, she is a businesswoman who knows how to empower others and use innovative approaches to make projects and people more engaged. And she uses art in order to do that. And that's kind of the basis of the Women's Project. And then Jordan has a much more political background. So when you're using art to make political change, seems obvious you would have this kind of partnership between an artist and a politico. So I'm interested in the back and forth and how this is going to work. Not being an artistically inclined person in any way myself, I sometimes have a hard time wrapping my brain around this kind of activism and how it actually has an effect and how do you measure those effects. So I'm interested in learning more about that.
Me too. And I am similar to you. I couldn't draw my way out of a paper bag. I couldn't sculpt anything. I certainly can't sing. Actually, you're a pretty good karaoke singer.
That's true.
You've got some vocal chops.
Great with a couple of beers and a microphone in the
who isn't?
A bar. So
who isn't?
Definitely making change with my, Hotel California rendition.
Right. And so Jordan and Jocelyn approached us and asked to be on the show because they wanted to talk about this project. And so we want to encourage any of our listeners out there, if you have a special project that you're working on and you're working to affect change in your community, or you're running for office and have a great story to tell, or you're trying to change what's going on around us, let us know. We are, signing people up. So we're getting requests all over the country and we're trying to plot people out on a schedule. And we'd love to have your voice added to this as well. So thank you to Jordan and Jocelyn, obviously, for reaching out to us.
Yeah.
So without further ado, let's get to the interview. Jocelyn and Jordan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
So we gave a very brief bio in the intro and very brief introduction to the Women Project, but I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit more background on the Women Project and how it originated.
Sure. So hi, this is Jocelyn. I am coming to you by way, I'm a Connecticut kid, and I lived in Los Angeles for a really long time, getting my master's degree in fine art, and came back to the East Coast and landed in Rhode Island, thinking I landed in what Connecticut is more of, which is it's a more progressively represented state. So while the citizens are very active, I would say those who are representing the state are not. And so as an artist, I moved to a semi-rural area and joined, ironically, I landed in a town where we have the fifth oldest not-for-profit woman-started art gallery in America called the Hera Art Gallery. And Hera is this, it's 42 years old, and it still has members who started it 42 years ago, a group of women who wanted to keep their work contextually relevant and in the dialogue, and didn't have a place for it then, and still in a lot of ways we as women struggle in the arts as well, so it continues. And 45 got elected, and I was there as a pretty new member of the gallery, and the gallery formally is called Hera Educational Foundation and Art Gallery. And I went to the board of directors and I said, can we, the week after, start a lecture series? And I did this also, by the way, with another colleague, board member named Mara Trachtenberg, who turns out is also someone who helped start the Woman Project. So that's really brief. But she and I went and said, we want to start a lecture series every week or every other week. We want to bring a topic in Hera's space to the community, because we saw people walking around, moving around in our community, like their heads down. Very liberal community, this particular nook, but people weren't doing anything. So we said, okay, we'll bring people to you. And if you can't get involved with them actively, then you can probably pay them money, or vice versa. So the first person that we had that came to do the lecture was an immigration lawyer. And questions, like we packed this gallery, there were over 60 people, which by the way, in a small gallery that is packed. And people started asking questions and was like, what's going to happen to the DACA recipients? What's going to happen to people who are struggling with immigration now? And to his credit, this particular gentleman, his name is Michael Doyle, who practices out of New London, but also Connecticut, but is also doing work in Providence, basically said, we don't know. It's a week after this man has been elected, we will see. And so very quickly, we started ganging up more lectures because people kept saying, oh my gosh, can we keep going? And the third one was Planned Parenthood. So the legislative representative, Craig O'Connor, came and he started giving us basic statistics like Rhode Island is a state where we are rated F by NARAL standards. We have a horrible constitution that if Roe v. Wade were overturned, there would be massive problems. And so Mara and I and Jordan, who was there at the lecture, and Mara and Jordan knowing each other, came together with two others and said, let's do something with it. Hera being a 501c3 couldn't do it as a not-for-profit. So we started a 501c4 where we could deal with politics and start talking. So I'll hand it off to you, Jordan.
Yeah, so I had a background in politics, and I'm a Washington State native, so I know that we legalized abortion in 1970 before Roe v. Wade, and I knew this was a right that was already protected. And I was really surprised that Rhode Island hadn't taken the steps to protect Roe v. Wade in case it was overturned. And then we got an F from NARAL, and we were rated hostile from the Guttmacher Institute. So that's kind of how we started.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit about NARAL and the F rating that Rhode Island got, because both Rainey and I heard that, and we were like, what? How is that possible?
Right. So it's for a few reasons. We get an F because we don't have Roe v. Wade would not be protected. So it was a D prior to the election, but the election changed that, right? The potential risk in the Supreme Court, they downgraded it to an F. And also our state employees don't have coverage for abortion as part of their health care package. Our state Medicaid program doesn't cover abortion, which a lot of states do. And the only abortion access in Rhode Island is in Providence County, and we actually have 5 counties in the state. So a lot of people don't necessarily have access. So those are the criteria.
Can you tell us about if there's only access in the one place, how far might someone have to drive in order to access that clinic?
I mean, so I live in southern Rhode Island. It might be like 40 miles-ish, but it's true. If you're in southern Rhode Island, the closest clinic to you might be in Connecticut instead of Rhode Island.
Oh, okay.
So I'd say it's probably around 30 minutes. There's some areas where you may or may not have like good transportation access where people don't have cars, and that might be an impact as well.
So what is the legislative makeup right now? Like, what is your political breakdown by party in your legislature?
So we are known as the most democratic state in the country because our General Assembly is so dominated by Democrats. However, our Speaker of the House is endorsed by Rhode Island Right to Life.
Oh.
So he's a Democrat.
Let's be more specific. The House of Representatives, 38% of the Democrats are endorsed by Right to Life. And the number is a little bit higher as well in our House of Representatives.
The Senate.
Do I just live in such a bubble?
Sorry.
That is so shocking to me.
Yeah.
That many Democrats
So shocking.
are endorsed by Right to Life.
Well,
In Rhode Island.
I mean, we are a state of only 1 million people, and we are also, due to our size, we are the most Catholic state in the nation, and we have a very powerful Catholic community, basically running our politics, it seems.
And I think the other thing to put this in context, right? Like, I'm a Democratic voter because I believe in the power of the federal government to make change for me. And so I go and I vote for a Democrat for president and to represent me in Congress and in the Senate. And I think a lot of Rhode Islanders have been doing that for a long time and haven't been paying as close attention as they should to the down ballot races. Right, we have Senator Reid and we have Senator Whitehouse, who are both pro-choice senators. They're great advocates for our state. We have a pro-choice governor. We have our statewide offices. We are electing, pro-choice candidates, but we haven't necessarily been paying attention to our state house races.
So you have a big problem to solve here, like with the state legislature, which I assume is partly what motivated you to start the Women Project.
Right. So the Women Project was this moment where we, as a couple artists who have shown our work internationally, and then a couple others like Jordan, who have been in politics for a long time, said, I wonder if, and this is really, I guess, where we should have ended our description of how the Women Project started, is I wonder if we can use alternative methods to bring attention to these issues. These are very, pretty straightforward. Getting enough from NARAL, having 38% of our House and Senate represented by Right to Life. Pretty actionable items there. And what we found was also a couple of us have professor backgrounds. And so we said, can we take the educational direction and say, okay, we're here to educate through artistic action, through general advocacy, political advocacy, and draw attention to these facts, because we think if these facts become known, people are going to become a little bit more in that moment that you guys are experiencing or saying as well, like, holy moly.
Right. So
it's a nice way of saying it.
So how has this organization is a year old now? How has the organization changed from its inception to today?
I think we started in southern Rhode Island feeling just disconnected from our state capital, that it was hard for us to take action and get to the state house. So we spent a lot of time thinking about what methods we could use to take our voices to the state house when we weren't there during the legislative session. So we started with postcards and house parties. But through the process, I think we've been really surprised that we've been able to develop a statewide network, and just the outpouring of support there is to talk about this issue, because it feels like some Rhode Islanders just haven't gotten the opportunity to talk about it before. So the governor has one day of the year where you get to go to the beach for free. And we started this patchwork quilt at the beach, and we just started talking to people at the beach, right? And you would think that maybe there would be some pushback, but there really wasn't any. And people were happy to sign our quilt squares and talk about the issue. And so I think we've been able to gain some momentum. And one of the things is that we're starting to really meet a lot of the longtime supporters of the issue, who are now really excited about helping us push forward. They spent a lot of time. There was still activism going on around this issue, but it hadn't been as amplified in the state. So I think we have helped create that and created a little bit of momentum.
That's great. And just for our non-northern East Coast folks, they have to pay for access to the beach. They don't get to go there.
You do? Yeah. So I think technically we get around some laws. You probably want to edit this out, but in Rhode Island, you pay for parking and beach cleanup. So you're technically not paying for access, I think, is how that's defined.
Right.
It's the same as us paying for a discovery pass here, right? Where you go to the state parks or the hiking trails and stuff. Yeah. You definitely
exactly. So that's
okay.
Yeah, that's kind of how it's viewed. But as a Washington State native myself, when I moved here, I was incredibly shocked by it.
Yeah, like in New Jersey, you have to pay.
I'm gonna say in defense of Rhode Island a little bit here that coming from having lived in Southern California, where you pay for everything, all forms of nature are basically paid for. I think that, or not paid for it, you have to pay for it. It didn't come as much of a shock. I guess you're always having to try and get access to the beaches there at certain hours. You can then go on, and it's the same here at 5 o'clock. All of the locals come out and play. So
got it.
It's like you unearth all of the trolls. They kind of no. Anyway.
Okay.
I don't think we're editing much of that out, by the way. Unless you think it's going to get you in trouble, that's staying in because it's all good. It's good stuff.
Nice.
I think
so glad to just insulted our friends.
No, not at all. I think one of the things that like we're trying to do is not. I mean, I don't think people in Washington, for example, understand the political climate necessarily in Rhode Island. Like both of us are gobsmacked that you're getting an F from NARAL. I think that's stunning to us.
No, it's well, and in fairness, I mean, I got here from Los Angeles, right? And I was like, you're kidding. I mean, it's exactly what you're saying. And I stood here and I was like, okay, maybe in LA, I'm used to having more people get really mad and do shit fast. And I was like, that's also not a Rhode Island thing. So that was where myself and Mara were like, we have to act now. And I don't know what that is, but let's start soft. And the art side of it too really became a moment where, and this was maybe at first a little bit by accident, was we realized that we could get people to come out who wouldn't normally come out. And we saw that really quickly. So we started asking artists to make postcards. And one of our artist friends was just on the cover of Newsweek with almost an exact same piece that she made for us that she modified for the cover of Newsweek. And we had this, and people were talking about art, and they were talking about women in art, and they were talking about how could they themselves as women use the network that was basically being threatened instantaneously by our gender with Trump coming on as president. And I think that really, I mean, a lot of people say that might be the silver lining to Trump being president, right? Is he kind of immobilized an entire country. He also highly mobilized an entire gender.
Right.
Or folks identifying as that gender. I mean, it's incredible. And I would say that that's really warmed my heart about being in this state, which compared to living in Southern California is a much more Caucasian community. It's not as diverse, but the diversity has such a worse rap sheet here in this state because there's less support. And so the intersectional aspects of the Woman Project really quickly unfolded in terms of, while we're talking about wanting women's rights for abortion in this state, we were really talking, and still are talking about, we're looking for women's bodily freedom. And that is something that is highly under attack in this state, as well as across the nation. But I mean, for example, statistics are now coming out saying that 1 in 3 African-American women are dying at childbirth in 2018. And Rhode Island actually is exactly there. And so for people to hear this in our particular state, our Catholic state, our state where religion teaches to be good to the poor, and it teaches to be fair to one another and treat people how you wish to be treated, we are still seeing a blind eye that's going constantly around and around surrounding these issues. And so the Women Project took up different types of relationships with other organizations to bring attention to these things. So while we are fighting for reproductive health and reproductive freedom, I mean, we're recognizing that, like everywhere, we can help be the voice of the larger systemic issues going on for women.
And are you finding that art is the way to organize people, like traditional organizing around passing legislation maybe isn't inclusive of folks that you are now bringing into this project? That's what it's sounding like to me. Is that accurate?
I'll speak to this real quickly, and I think Jordan can add to it. But I would say that to quickly make it about me and then to make it about community, my expertise is in creating spectacle-based events. And so I understand how to make people feel included, as well as how to to have there be a self-reflection. And so we wondered if art would do that. And we found very quickly that it could. And quickly people started telling us that this is fun. Like, I'm having fun doing this. Where I'm going to be honest, when you're going up to the State House and you're trying to lobby or you're trying to, speak up to your issue, it's intense. I mean, we've experienced a fair amount of pushback by the NRA saying that we support the Speaker of the House in your state because he has not allowed a vote to the floor for abortion. So we have the NRA going to bat for pro-life. And then they're showing up 10 to our 1, basically screaming in the lobby of the White Houses, State House, around a lot of our supporters and volunteers. So we're finding that art is creating, I would say, a safe place, because sometimes art can be and sometimes it's not, but I think that it's empowering people to feel like if they can't physically be there, like Jordan referenced earlier, we have this quilt. People are signing a quilt square. This quilt is being built by master quilters around the state, and this thing travels, these squares travel, and we now have been asked to bring this quilt down to Washington, D.C., and to bring it to the Hill to show our representatives on the Hill. And it's following the model of the AIDS quilt, right? It's following, actually, there's a lot of movement right now in the United States around quilt making because of the history of women's work in art, as well as what that symbolizes. And people connect with it. And so we're giving a space to art and action in a way that we are seeing incredible results. It's not a new term, but we're calling it art-activism.
Can you repeat that? It's art-activism?
It's art, A-R-T, and then vism at the end.
Nice.
Like activism, but art-activism. Jordan, do you want to add to that?
Well, I think just from a more traditional organizing perspective, right? So if we think about the life cycle of our quilt square, which is the quilt that we're building, is that we have a conversation, and maybe we're intentional about where we're having those conversations, and we're bringing those quilt squares, and we're talking to people about it, and we're help educating. Because one thing that we found is a lot of Rhode Islanders really just didn't know that our state wasn't protected. They never asked before. So we have about 2,000 signed quilt squares in the process. And I would say each of those happened because of a one-on-one conversation. And I think that's really just basic organizing, but having the quilt as a piece helps change it, right? Like, you don't have to ask somebody to sign a petition or something. You're signing a quilt square, and you can tell them to have a seam allowance instead of, make sure they print or something. So it's following a traditional organizing method. But then also when we bring people together for like quilting and sewing and actually making the quilt, it's really intergenerational. And we can hear these pre-Roe v. Wade stories of like some of the quilters that are helping us make this quilt. And that's a skill that they have to give to this, and they share their stories and their space with us. And I think it helps, especially the younger generation that grew up with this as just a right, to understand like the urgency to our health and safety if we don't take action and if we don't stand up for this right.
I love that. So I have this funny little question that I want to ask you. So I was talking about this with a group of people yesterday, getting them hyped up about the interview that we were going to be doing today. And someone who, let's just say, is not maybe the most feminist of our group said, well, isn't having this group of women do quilting reinforcing stereotypes, which would be an undermining of a feminist argument? What would you say to that ding dong in my group?
No, a good ding dong. I mean, we should also address the other feminist issue, white elephant in the room, which is this is for a very long time been a topic that white women of middle class have taken up as their fight, and we've embraced that to a degree and said, okay, we are an intersectional group. One of our co-organizers is transgender male. We have a lot of organizations that we work with and show up. We're all sort of collaborating, but we took it up in this part of the state, which is also slightly diverse. And we recognized that we wanted to take on the responsibility somewhat in this moment of saying, okay, we're separated from the city. How can we get involved now? And we know this may not be plaguing our life this very second, but it's coming. And we've had a lot of people come to us and say, you know, what about the issue that you're not waking up every night in the middle of the night worrying about this issue? You're not taking on the issue or I don't know, Jordan, how can I say it better? I'm sort of stumbling here, thinking about what Stephanie said.
I mean, I think, so we have a legislative focus, which is to pass the Reproductive Health Care Act. And in the process of building support, we've tried to take our meetings. We try and do meetings twice a month, our planning meetings, and we do them in different parts of the state. And I think those provide an opportunity to open up dialogue and hear people's concerns. And if we can create space to do that, I think that's really important.
But the art part, the feminist part about being, you can't deny that, yes, this is traditionally a woman's work, we're bringing it back, but also there's something to be said for honoring the women who were doing this work. And so in a lot of cases as feminists, like, we want to acknowledge the past and honor it and bring it forward into the light. And so in a lot of cases, we see this as one way to acknowledge. Also, while it's sort of a sidestep to your question, this is a state that the main way that people were making money was building sails for boats. So we have this huge history of textiles in this particular state. So it's even a site-specific feminist topic.
I would jump in and say also, going. Like, the quilt isn't the only art project going on here. So that's what number
Correct.
One is what I would tell your ding dong friend, Jason. But also when I think about the AIDS quilt, like, that wasn't an exclusively woman thing either. So building this giant piece of art that is like, I desperately want to sign this quilt. Yeah. So like,
are you listening, ding dong? There's your answer.
Come on, ding dong.
Not to take us off track on that, but I do think that it was important to address, because I do.
No, I think it's important to address.
Yeah.
Totally.
And I think, this leads me into my next question, which is for folks who are not creative, but really do fundamentally believe in your mission statement, how can they participate in this? So, like, I have zero artistic bone in my body, like
Me
zero.
Either.
Yeah. I like to think that I'm creative, but I am not. And maybe more with words than I am with anything artistic. So where could folks who are not necessarily artistic plug into your organization and help with your advocacy?
I think we offer it all, actually. So we do these art projects, but they're meant so anybody can help at any phase. And also, the Women Project is part of the Rhode Island Reproductive Freedom Coalition. And so within that group, we work with other organizations, and some of them fill a more traditional space. But we have a volunteer lobbyist, and so she's at the State House every week just to create a presence for us. And that's something that she can offer. And if, you're good at talking to people, you could be at the State House every week talking to our elected officials while somebody else is sewing quilt squares together.
That's great.
We have more things. And so, for example, if someone was a writer and felt strongly about this, one thing that we would love to see happen is in every state, I think that we have so many states experiencing pressure in this particular issues, that friends from outside who are writing from the outside and saying, I'm paying attention to the issues in Ohio. You are basically bringing legislation that women who are pregnant and have abortions at 6 weeks are going to be tried. It's like, most women don't know that they're pregnant at 6 weeks at this point. And, and so for pressure people to be writing from the outside, for our powerful 4 leaders underneath our governor in this state who are basically in control of what types of laws can be brought to the floor for a vote, for those folks to feel like people are watching from outside of Rhode Island and are angry, we really need that help. We need people writing in. We have a website which makes it very easy for people to quote unquote volunteer. And once a week, we send out things that say, here's the thing that you can do, and here are things that are going on. If people want to do this quilt squares, we would love to send them the directions on what to do. It's super simple. Cut out a 7-inch by 7-inch piece of cloth, sign your name, sign your state, sign a date. And we're going to start making quilt sections. So there are 64 names per section. And then we hang them onto one another by carabiners. The thing is incredibly heavy. We have over 2,000 signatures at this moment. We have over 400 that are out of state. And so we're starting to build those squares as well to say, okay, here are the Rhode Islanders, but here are the folks from around the world that are saying, we're watching you and we expect better for your people. I mean, basically, if it matters, 63% of our state has come forward in a Pew Research grant? No.
63% of Rhode Islanders believe in safe and legal abortion.
Right. And so they're not listening. They don't want to bring it to the floor for a vote. And so as a result, we need outside pressure. And so we would love anyone that feels inclined to do this. And we're asking people to write postcards or write letters.
So this is great. So you came to us at Election University, you emailed us about this project and got us super excited about doing this because you heard an episode, an earlier episode right. On here. What I would love to know is a little bit more about what motivated you to contact us about being on the interview here, but also like, let's assume that somebody in Iowa, for example, after they just passed the most oppressive legislation on abortion rights ever is listening to this and they're like, oh God, I just want to do something similar. I want to get active. I want to do something. What advice you'd give them on starting a project similar to this? So tell us a little bit about why you reached out to us, what you liked about our previous episode, what advice you'd give to other folks.
Yeah, I had just listened to your episode about introverts, and I myself am an introvert, and I was so happy to hear an organization that was talking about politics talk about what it's like to do it when you're an introvert, because I think it's such an extrovert space, or people assume it to be an extrovert space. And when I think about a lot of what I do and what I bring to the Women Project, it's because I'm an introvert. And so I personally really enjoy the one-to-one piece of organizing. And one thing the Women Project has done is created an interview series. And that was really created because you go and you have a meeting with someone and you learn so many interesting things about their life. And you just wish that everybody could know that. So we created this interview series to highlight voices that maybe our supporters are not hearing every day, to help them understand how reproductive freedom fits into everything people are advocating for, and let's each person share their personal story. And I think when I think about what's going on in Iowa right now, and if I would be a supporter and feel how I feel in Iowa, I would probably just start talking to people, right? Like, I think there's more people who think like you than don't. I mean, national polls show 7 in 10 people in this country support safe and legal abortion access. So it's a matter of talking to people and opening up dialogues and figuring out ways to have conversations. And also, because something like that happened in Iowa, it should just increase the pressure for us to take action in Rhode Island. We should look to the states where we have the desire to take action and push back against this, because we need more states that are going to be safer. And it's not just about protecting this right. It's about other rights once we start electing our federal representatives, right? We have a president right now, and we're living under a global gag rule. So we are impacting the health of millions of women across the world based on that. And that really starts talking about this issue locally and making sure that we continue to build upward and ask our elected officials where they stand so we don't end up in this space again.
That's great. Speaking of the interviews, you and the ones that you list on your website, you have a really great one with one of your longtime Rhode Island fighters for reproductive freedom, Marianne Sorrentino, and her testimony in front of the legislature on the Reproductive Health Care Act. And a thing that struck me about that conversation is that your state hasn't really had this discussion about abortion since the 1980s. And the state constitution you had mentioned earlier in the interview is one of the reasons why you have this F. Is one of your goals ultimately, at the end of the day, to change the state constitution? You want to pass this act, of course, but do you want to change that constitution so that your rights and freedoms around reproductive health are protected?
I think we should just start with the Reproductive Health Care Act. Let's not lose focus.
Right. Am I putting the cart before the horse on this one?
Right. I think so. I mean, it feels good that we've developed a certain base of support, but we still haven't got this to a vote, or like there's a long uphill battle. But yeah, certainly at some point they will have to reconsider the state constitution. And there's this constitutional convention that we vote on every 10 years. And I think so from the last one that they had in the 80s, there ended up a vote that went before a vote, and the voters turned it down. There was the anti-choice amendment to the Constitution, and that got voted down. So it happened that time, but I don't think we want to open that up.
That can of worms.
Yeah.
Right.
So you said that you're a 501c4, which means you can do like PAC and electoral work. Do you have plans on like getting more people elected who are on your side to help pass this act? Or are you just focused on moving the people who are there?
So we actually, over the course of our last year of action, we have maybe 4 different candidates who have been sort of regular volunteers with us who are now running for office. And
nice.
I'm sure that they will just use the network of people that now have been created and exist and to help work on those campaigns. We don't want to forget about the end of our legislative session. So we have until June, and we want to keep the pressure up in the General Assembly and not lose that piece of the focus right now. So we haven't focused too much on the electoral side yet, all the while knowing that people who started volunteering with us have like sort of moved along in their commitment to the issue and started to move into more traditional spaces.
So, and then considering how important it is to pass this one piece of legislation, but how difficult it's like, looking like it's going to be, how are you measuring success? Like, is success just passing legislation, or is it moving the needle, with particular representatives whose votes flipped, but maybe they weren't enough or something like that?
I think we have to set up some small victories along the way, which is part of like why we tried to have fun as we go. So we just got a quilt square signed by the governor. It's like, that's nice. It's a sign of support. Like, we can use this quilt to show the visual building of support across the state. And as we, keep in contact with our supporters through our newsletter, we try to share those kinds of building victories that we have along the way. In the fall, we coordinated efforts before the House of Representatives voted on the 20-week ban. And we made 400 phone calls, I think, to various people in Rhode Island to call Congressman Langevin and ask him to vote no on the 20-week ban. And at that point, we had a 53-foot petition that we did. It was our first petition, and we took it to his office, because if people support protecting Roe v. Wade in Rhode Island, they certainly don't support a 20-week ban. And through that effort, Congressman Langevin voted against the 20-week ban, and he reversed his prior position based on the outreach of Rhode Islanders. So having those kind of victories along the way has been helpful and shows us we're on the right track.
That's excellent.
That is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak to a more traditional way too in terms of recognizing growth, and that is that I do a lot of the marketing for us, and so we're watching our numbers increase. We're watching how many people are getting involved in terms of showing up, but as well as just reading our stuff or reaching out to us and saying, how can I help? I mean, I want to loop back to a question that you had about how are we growing, and if people out of state wanted to do this too. We haven't got, we don't have a blueprint for the Woman Project and this is how you do it. But we've had people reach out and say, what if I wanted to start the Woman Project in New York City? And it's like, sure, why not? I mean, it doesn't cost anything to call yourself a Woman Project yet. I mean, we don't know what that is. And so at this point, we like the idea of this being all for one and one for all. And so I think that we do want to see people feel that if there is a space that they're feeling aligned with and safe in, to use that as a space to also grow with. So if there are people out there who are feeling like they want to try what we're trying, or reach out to us and say, how can I start it? Please do. And we have a website that's very easy to reach out to us, and we get back really quickly. And we are happy to have conversations with people in different ways as well, in terms of helping them figure it out. So it has been a slow growth in this more formal way, which is people saying they want to help volunteer or join the newsletter, but it hasn't stopped, and it continues through word of mouth. And I think we only have 9 colleges and universities in this state, but we have a lot of younger participation too. And I think that that's a good sign of those communities also taking up the torch as well.
Have you considered incorporating personal storytelling into this work at all? I'm thinking about the Shout Your Abortion movement and kind of the accidental national movement that became. And I'm wondering if you are using storytelling or if you've considered partnering with them at all for kind of a lessons learned of how you accidentally expand to be a nationwide movement.
So we just reached out to Shout Your Abortion because actually 2 things come together in that question. Earlier, Marianne Sorrentino was mentioned, the former executive director of Planned Parenthood, who was excommunicated by the Catholic Church in the 80s. And at the 10-year anniversary of Roe v. Wade, she did a speak out in our state house. And organizing was a little bit different then without like the digital online piece. And they took out ads in the paper, and they didn't really know who was going to come to the state house. And people showed up and shared their stories. And one thing she says is people showed up and shared their stories, people she knew, and she'd never heard their stories before.
Right.
And so after Marianne testified at the State House, she said to us, what about recreating that again? And doing it, and this year is the 45th anniversary of Roe v. Wade. So we're talking to her right now about doing that in October and building towards the storytelling and helping people prepare for that. And we sent an inquiry out to Shout Your Abortion to ask if they could help us with it.
That's great.
Cool.
So let's get to the promotional parts of this. Like, what's coming up for you folks? What's on the calendar specifically? And if folks want to get involved or participate, how do they find you and get in touch?
So the Woman Project is, we have a website. We are thewomanproject.org. And in terms of just getting in touch, it's a pretty easy form that's right there on the cover. On a weekly basis, we continue doing interviews with people around the state, telling their own stories of how reproductive freedom impacts them, as well as if it goes away, how does it affect them? So we have a range there. As far as projects come, we are doing projections. It's a very common, I think, movement, you would say, in the arts, where we're doing different types of projection pieces with the hashtag Oregon Equity Now. And it's on different buildings throughout the state. And we started one, but we're about to do a whole bunch this summer. So people who are interested in that, we will have a schedule of where those are going to be and photographs that are taken from there. And then in October, we have a speak out that we're doing. And along the way, we have some smaller projects that we're doing. So we try to do a few bigger projects and then trickle it every month, having a smaller piece to the puzzle. So best bet is to stay tuned to our Facebook page, our Instagram feed, our Twitter account, and take a look at those, as well as taking a look at us online and starting to get a handle. And this is all about, as Jordan said, the one-on-one. So we are all about talking to people and making time to figure out how to do that. Granted, if we were to get 200 calls tomorrow where everyone's asking to talk to us, it might be a little bit harder. But at this point, we want to try and figure out how to build this community and make it a stronger voice.
Yeah, that's great. So we'll have all of this information in the show notes for folks as well. But it's thewomanproject.org, thewomanproject.org for folks that'll have all that information. Jocelyn and Jordan, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. This was a fantastic interview, and good luck with everything that you're doing. We're really pulling for you here in Washington State.
Thank you so much. It's an honor.
We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. All right.
Bye-bye. A huge thank you to Jocelyn Foy and Jordan Hevener for joining us today from The Woman Project.
Yeah.
Randy, what'd you think?
It was really, really interesting. And I'm still just stunned by the political conditions in Rhode Island that just never would have wrapped my brain around. And, we got to get creative in doing this work. And I think that though I am not an artist, I can definitely see the value in doing activism in this way and how it gets people involved who are generally left out of the kind of organizing and political process. It speaks back to our episode about being an introvert in politics and the way that how we do our work caters to people who are extroverts. So I think it's really exciting. And I think that we can all probably infer by how quickly this movement has grown that there's a lot of interest and that it's going to be much bigger than Rhode Island pretty soon.
Yeah. And I think the other part of this, the number of people that approach politics, I think sometimes are turned off by it, not just by the negativity and some of the national language that's used around it that can be a certain turnoff to people, but also because it feels inaccessible. Going back to the episode that we had with Assemblywoman Yulene Yu was, about making government accessible. And I think what was really great about this is how organic and simple the creation of the Woman Project was. It started out with these conversations that they were having in an art studio that grew into, a very strong movement. I'm really impressed with the work that they've been able to turn around in a short period of time, and how, I don't want to say simple because I'm sure all the volunteers feel like they've sacrificed a lot of time and energy and exhaustion on doing this work. But from an outsider's perspective, it seems like they've been able to ramp up very quickly with a lot of energy, harnessing a lot of enthusiasm to get something done. So hats off to our friends in Rhode Island. And if you are out there listening to this and you want to get involved, please, by all means, get in touch with them at thewomanproject.org. I want to thank again our interviewees for joining us today. And thank you to our listeners for another episode of Election University Podcast, for tuning in. This is our 20th episode.
Ooh.
I know, next year I can start drinking in a bar.
Yes.
And start doing shots with us. But our 20th episode, and we've hit the milestones of being downloaded in all 50 states and in 35 countries. Hello, Slovakia, our newest country. I'm still not quite sure what they're doing over there, but thank you for listening to us, and thank you for tuning in. And also thank you for contacting us directly, leaving reviews on iTunes. All of those things, help us develop a better product for our listeners, for the candidates out there, for political people who are interested in the process. We want this to be a tool and a resource for folks to use, and hopefully you find some value in it. So thank you for all the feedback. Thank you for reaching out to us. Please continue to do so at podcast@electionu.com. Any parting thoughts, Rainey?
This is awesome. I can't believe we've done 20 episodes. I'm having such a great time, and I really appreciate that people like the Women Project are reaching out to us to be like, hey, we exist. Can we talk about our thing? Because there's a lot going on around the country that we can't possibly be aware of. So, I really one of my favorite parts is kind of that back and forth that we get to have with the audience. It doesn't feel like there's a giant wall where we're inaccessible or they are inaccessible. So just thanks to the audience for being awesome.
Absolutely. And we have several of those coming up. Thrilled that people are reaching out to us. So looking forward to scheduling the rest of the folks. Thanks again, listeners, for tuning in. I'm your host, Jason Bennett.
And I'm Rainey Cohen.
Thanks again, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. This week's episode has ended, but the campaign fun doesn't have to. Head on over to www.electionu.com, where you can access all of the links mentioned in today's episode, as well as the show notes. There you can also sign up for regular announcements or register for our campaign school. It's your very own online personal trainer for winning campaigns. www.electionu.com. Click, learn, win.